Hi, Larissa. Thanks so much for having me in your art classroom at Sioux Falls Christian this morning. I really enjoyed it. I think your lesson is very good. The project is very interesting and exciting. Gives students an opportunity to explore and express who they are and issues that are important to them. And so, nice work. I'm going to take you through some of the notes I typed up. I just type up everything that I see, everything that I notice. Some of it might be helpful, some not so helpful. That's up to you to kind of determine. We've talked through a lot of these after the observation in class on Thursday, and so I'm not going to hit every point, but going to kind of probe you a little bit for some questions and just ways that you consider possibly improving upon that lesson or future lessons yet to come. So a lot of the questions I type in red, and you can use those for reflection. Personally, you could use those to respond to me as you write your weekly email on Friday. Both of those are great possibilities, or I suppose you could kind of ignore some of them too. Um, just noted at the very beginning of class, you and Miss Mulder kind of have a nice way of demonstrating co-teaching, especially early on. You kind of filled this role. You were getting the papers copied. You brought those in. You did the attendance while she began kind of activating students' knowledge, engaging them by showing that really cool student example of the box. Just a question I had there, do you want to show this process of attendance to the whole class? Do you want to share that particular screen? Sometimes you can block it, or you can freeze it, or you can do whatever. Just be aware of what you're doing and the fact that students are able to see that. Miss Mulder talked for about 5 minutes as she presented this former student's project. And then you began around 9:50 and taught or instructed for about 17 minutes. Miss Mulder kind of interjected at the end there and said something, kind of opened it up for questions, which no students seemed to have questions at that point. But that was another nice just example of co-teaching. She felt comfortable kind of interjecting occasionally throughout your lesson just based on her experience. I talked to you a little bit about the standard or the objective for the lesson. You did provide me in your lesson plan with some standards. They had some numbers. I don't know if those are South Dakota standards, national standards, what they are, because there was no real description as far as I could tell following the standards. But that is something I will be looking for a little bit more clarity on in future observations. What is it that students are expected to do or to learn? What is their learning objective for this particular lesson or project or unit or whatever it is? And that's really important to communicate to the students at the forefront. So you did a fantastic job giving students examples of previous projects, of allowing latitude and flexibility, that they could kind of approach this from a variety of different ways and be creative about it. But I was a little unclear, even up until the point where I kind of got that assessment rubric or checklist that you handed out to students at the end. What exactly is it that we're trying to do or to accomplish here? And so just being able to, it's important that you're able to sort of articulate that to students, to parents, to administrators, and so on. Let's see, when you were talking through the process, I thought that was really helpful. You mentioned that you would give them a worksheet later on. I was curious about your decision to withhold that. I thought possibly passing that out, it could be a distraction for students and keep them from focusing on the screen, but it could also be helpful as you go through these sample projects for students to see the criteria. Again, just communicating what are the expectations, what are the objectives that we're asking students to do. And sometimes it's nice for students to see that as they follow along with your direct instruction. We talked a little bit about your questioning, and I just quoted some of the things you said. You asked, just by looking at this, what do you think the artist is portraying? And then you followed that up with, what other things do you see or notice about this? I mentioned wait time to you in our discussion, and the fact that I struggle with this with some of my students as well. Don't be afraid of that silent time. It might just be processing time that students need. But then I question you again here in red. Why were students hesitant to share answers with the whole class? We talked through that a little bit. Both answers that were spoken aloud. I think there was one that came from the group of girls kind of by the door, but the first two initial responses came from that back table of boys. And I don't know if they're just a more outspoken group, but we mentioned the idea of pair share or table share to ensure that all students are getting an opportunity to voice their opinions or voice their responses, rather than just the one student who does participate in front of the whole class. You noted at one point, or you said, we want you to think metaphorically, but you don't have to. You can be literal. And I'm just thinking as a literal-minded kind of instructor, I'm a little, that confuses me a little bit, the direction there, because I think, again, I'm still having some difficulty because there were no clear objectives or no clear, that worksheet hadn't been articulated. I was a little unsure if students knew what you meant by you can be either metaphorical or literary or literal. But then the way you said it is, you said we want you to think metaphorically. So that seems to indicate that that's what you would prefer, but students wouldn't have to, but maybe if they wanted to get more credit, they need to think metaphorically. I think just considering how you approach that is important. I recognize in the art classroom especially, you want to allow students creative freedoms, and you want to allow them the opportunity to make things personal and exciting to them. Just be careful when you allow that much latitude that there's not too much freedom, that you're not confusing students without giving them some clear expectations. Do they all know how to think metaphorically? If not, maybe we want to make that a requirement of this activity or this project. They're probably pretty good at this point in high school thinking literally. But again, and this is one of your first lessons, so I understand, even as I'm talking now, that sometimes my mouth gets moving more quickly than my brain, and things that I say can be misconstrued. I think it's just important to kind of reflect on that, on what message am I sending to my students? Am I clearly letting them know what my expectations are for this project? If you want them to use metaphor, then why not just make that a standard so that you know all students are able to do that? Here again, I just mentioned what are the mandatory requirements, and then how will this be assessed or graded? And again, you spoke to this at the end of your presentation when you gave out that checklist or that rubric. But as I was following through the lesson for those 17 minutes before that happened, I was a little cloudy on how this works. And again, I don't know if that's the way the classroom normally is set up, where you provide the examples and then students know that the rubric is coming at the end or not. You noted to one student, you said, that's good, I never would have come up with that. And then I thought that was an important way to just sort of assure students, hey, you're doing a great job, thank you for participating. Perhaps you could then pose an additional question for that student or the group at large. Shortly after you began posing questions, you said, I noticed you guys are way more comfortable discussing in groups. And I just wanted to draw your attention to that, because I think that was probably an important aha or kind of light bulb moment during this lesson. Is you recognize, by just throwing out these questions, I'm not getting a whole lot of student response. But by allowing students to speak with their groups and their table partners, that's more comfortable for them. And then by expressing their thoughts that way, then they're more comfortable expressing in the whole group form. So that was great. I love the fact that you brought your own personal, that's supposed to be personal, example of the bottle to really begin to establish a connection with the students. I think it was powerful. When your mentor teacher was going through the student example at the beginning, I thought it was even more powerful when you talked about your own experience creating this type of art project while you were in college. So Overall, like I mentioned, I think the lesson was a success. I have a couple of questions down at the bottom for you to consider moving forward. But I look forward on Friday to hearing maybe adjustments or adaptations you made after I left to the next lesson, or just kind of some takeaways, some lessons you might use in the future. So again, great start from you. Keep in contact with me. Let me know if you have any questions via your weekly email to me. And then this email might be a good thing to just print out and keep in your notebook for future reference. So I'll talk to you later. Have a great weekend, Larissa. And once again, thank you for welcoming me into your classroom today.